Hello there, men, and welcome to the Masculinism Movement channel, a place for men to be men and talk about masculinity and men's issues. I'm your host, Brian Crawl, and today I'm going to be mansplaining to you about men and their emotions. How often have us men had to listen to others tell us things about how we feel, to the effect of, grown men don't cry, unless you're at a funeral, and even then. Only a pussy, little bitch, or fag would complain and talk about how they feel. A man who shows emotions is being feminine or crazy. Why are you acting so crazy? Admitting that you have a feeling? Stop complaining. Men aren't allowed to do such things. Don't act out. Stifle yourself. Sit down and shut up. Behave like a good man should. Or my favorite, real men are stoic and control their emotions and could just make any negative ones they have go away. If you can't do that, you aren't a real man. Why can't you just man up and be normal like all the other good little slave men out there who let themselves get treated any kind of way and never speak up for themselves and talk about how it makes them feel? Now, of course, I am paraphrasing a myriad of different social narratives into just a few concise lines here, but I don't think I need to say any more to illustrate it because you all know exactly what I'm talking about. If you are a man, you have spent your life listening to others tell you these kinds of things and maybe even joined in. And if you're a woman listening to this, you've spent your life hearing other people tell men such things and eventually probably joined in and said something like this to a man at one point in order to coerce him to be more compliant. Everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about. We all know it, so don't act like it doesn't happen just because I'm not using the same exact words that you have used or heard used before. We all know that every culture in the world stifles men's emotions and tells them they aren't allowed to express them or even have them. They try to censor our very thoughts and feelings. So I want to talk about this idea that men shouldn't have feelings or speak out about them. This concept of emotional sterility that is often called things like stoicism to make it sound good and not mentally unhealthy at all, which is what it exactly is. I already did a video on how men have feelings and how society responds to the different types of feelings we have, which you can find linked below, and this video is kind of a companion to it, so make sure you've watched that. Before I begin though, just a trigger warning for all you fragile little snowflakes out there, as well as you macho men out there who are really just snowflakes wearing a hard manly mask. If you listen long enough, this video is going to get into some very deep, heavy, dark, depressing, emotional shit that may be beyond what you are used to thinking about and able to handle. But that is exactly what we are here to discuss. Things that you cannot handle and how to be able to handle them. To begin, I was talking to my uncle recently, and he is a medical professional. I forget his title, but anyways, he said that some people are born without the ability to feel pain, that basically their nervous system doesn't work properly and doesn't give them the sensation of pain when it's supposed to. And when is it supposed to do this? When they are being hurt. And what happens to these people? They almost never survive for very long. And so you see, anyone with a fully functioning brain has feelings and has them for very good, important reasons. They exist for our survival. Sex feels good because it is necessary for the survival of the species. Pain feels bad because too much of it represents something that can kill or injure or harm you in some way. And while these are physical examples that I'm using, emotions are feelings that we feel for the same exact reasons. If something makes us feel good emotionally, that is our brain telling us that this is something that is good for our well-being, which we should do more of. It gives us these feelings to tell us that this is something worth liking and doing. If something makes us feel bad emotionally, that is our brain telling us that this is something that is bad for us and which we should avoid. Like the heartbreak caused by women, for instance. Our brain gives us these feelings to tell us that this is something we shouldn't be doing. As an athlete, I need to listen to my body because, as I found out when I was younger, if I do not listen to my body and ignore the signals of pain it is sending me and try to just push through it, I will end up getting injured. You cannot ignore the way you feel because it is detrimental to your health. When I've ignored my physical sensations of pain in the past, it leads right to injury. And I've learned the hard way to always pay attention to my feelings and listen to the messages they are giving me about what is going on in my body. Because that is what feelings are. Messages about what is going on that exist to inform you of important information. And not paying attention to them is not only dangerous, but fucking stupid. Those who don't do it wind up getting injured in more and more permanent ways until they either do or end up putting themselves completely out of commission. Now, of course, there are exceptions. A little pain like discomfort can be good for you. Some of the healthiest foods and medicines have bitter flavors due to their high nutrient and medicinal content. That doesn't mean we should avoid them just because we don't like the way they taste. Similarly, working out burns because it is good for our muscles. If we are being hedonistic and only eating things that taste sweet and spending our time only relaxing, doing things that are physically pleasurable, never getting any exercise, that will actually not help us survive, but rather the opposite. So, similarly, living your life in an emotional comfort zone and only doing what makes you feel emotionally good will cause you to become weak in character and probably develop mental health problems, because what occurs when you avoid discomfort is that you become hypersensitive to it. So then you will become emotionally sensitive and easily triggered, which is exactly what we are seeing with the young liberals of Gen Z today. They live in a comfort zone, and so even hearing words they disagree with feels threatening to them or somehow emotionally harmful because they've literally rewired their brains to be that sensitive. However, that doesn't mean you should do the opposite and try to become emotionally insensitive and numb and deny yourself the ability to feel so that you can be more mentally strong and macho like many men do. Emotions are functions of a working brain. We experience emotions because our brain is giving us messages about what it's interpreting. If something makes us feel a certain way, that is our brain trying to give us information about that thing and how we should perceive it. Now again, granted, it's not always right. It can be wrong at times. There can be something that makes you nervous, for instance, like going to a job interview. And while your emotions are telling you that this thing intimidates you and that the emotional mind may want you to avoid it, that obviously doesn't mean you should avoid it. When I was younger, I had many young female friends who were very weak-minded and would actually flake out on job interviews and such simply because they felt nervous or intimidated, even though that is just a natural feeling when you're doing something important. So again, an overly sensitive and overactive emotional mind, which we allow to take control of our rational mind and govern our actions, will at times steer us in wrong directions. So I'm not telling you to be hyper-emotional, but at least we need to allow our emotional mind to do its job in these cases and protect us. For when you deny such feelings as nervousness and are a very confident person like me, that can lead to injury. There's been plenty of times in my life when there was something I should have been intimidated by or scared of that I wasn't, and then I ended up getting hurt. Too much confidence and emotional insensitivity leads you right into harm's way without realizing it, because your brain is not giving you the emotional input and signaling that it is supposed to. Denying your feelings is like telling your brain to not function properly and literally trying to shut down the functioning of different brain centers. It just doesn't make sense. The only people who don't have feelings are people whose brains don't function right and who thus have mental disorders, which are also personality disorders. Disorders such as sociopathy and psychopathy. These people are the literal worst case scenarios of what a human being can be. It doesn't feel good to be that kind of person. They aren't happy. Their consciousness exists in a state of darkness, and their lives are paths of destruction. And yet, because society wants men to be strong for it, one of the ways men attempt to be good, masculine, cultural memes for society so that they can get the validation they want and be told by everyone that they are a good man or a real man is that they try to turn off their feelings and become more like these emotionally brain-dead sociopaths. So what happens is these men do become more sociopathic and toxic, hence giving masculinity a bad name. But unless they are doing real brain damage to themselves somehow through alcohol abuse or drug abuse or something, they aren't actually making their feelings go away. They're just suppressing them. These emotions get repressed into the subconscious where they fester and ferment and grow into much worse versions of what they once were. And then they begin to leak out and lash out and get converted into anger and rage. Take one of our modern masculine cultural figures, Tony Soprano. He does the exact things I mentioned, and thus he became a very toxic, destructive man, more and more as the show went on. We could see in that show that he is actually a very emotional person, and trying to be macho only causes him to not actually have as much control over his feelings as he would like, and he lashes out quite destructively at times. His Uncle Junior was older and wiser, and I'll always remember one scene where there was a time he was going against Tony and talking to his new recruit for the job. When the recruit left, Junior's next in command, Bobby, said, "He's fearless, that one." And June said, "Yeah, so? Then what? He gets shot? He's no good to us dead." He went on to explain that he needed someone who was a smart negotiator, not a fearless instigator. He needed someone who was less cold and sociopathic, someone like Tony. Soon after, the fearless man in question did get killed because he wasn't afraid of something happening to him that he should have been. It's not smart to try to stop your emotional mind from working. Not only is it not emotionally intelligent, but your emotional mind is where things like intuition and imagination come from. Your ability to imagine possible scenarios and intuit which ones will probably happen comes from the emotional mind, and that's super important. Tony is an emotional man, which makes him highly intuitive and socially intelligent. He had a real sense for social situations. It made him smarter and more successful than any of the other guys on the show because most of them were these macho men who were much stupider than he was, probably because they had less activity in their emotional minds. And what happens to men who cannot intuitively sense when something bad is to come? They can't prepare to avoid it, and thus they end up suffering many hardships that could have been avoided by a more intuitive person. And they also fail due to poor planning and preparedness. If you're enjoying listening to what I have to say, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you feel I'm adding value to your life, you can also tip me at the PayPal link below in proportion to the amount of value added. Your support will help me be able to continue this work because the oppressive fascists at YouTube are against this kind of content and actively trying to suppress it. So it is only with the help of viewers like you that I'll be able to keep fighting the good fight against the evil fucking matriarchy. Every single emotion that is possible for your brain to experience exists as a brain function for a good reason. They all serve a different, specific purpose. And while some of them ought to be ignored in some situations, ignoring most of them much of the time just makes you a fucking numbskull with little to no self-awareness or social and situational awareness. And you end up acting like a fucking retard. And I'm using that word literally because in stifling the emotional centers of your brain, you are literally retarding its function. And why the fuck would you want to do that? You wouldn't want to try to give yourself a makeshift frontal lobotomy with a power drill or give yourself electroshock therapy with a car battery, would you? So when you feel a certain feeling, why would you tell your brain not to feel it before at least examining what it is and where it's coming from and why you're having it and if it means anything? But you see, most of the macho guys who spout this nonsense about being unemotional and stoic and such, these are guys who are not only low on self and social awareness and quite stupid, but they also tend to have to eat a lot of shit from other people. For instance, often they may be in henpecked relationships, which means that their woman is constantly nagging them, guilting and shaming them, bitching at them, putting them down, and doing things to make them feel bad. And because of their codependent tendencies, they don't want to leave the relationship, and they also don't want to stand up for themselves. So instead, they just try to numb themselves to all the emotional abuse their wives or girlfriends are laying on them day after day. Instead of actually being honest with themselves about this problem that they have a negative influence in their life that is doing psychological harm to them and trying to solve that problem, they figure that they can just ignore it and try not to let the hurt register in their mind. However, that doesn't mean the damage isn't being done. It may be felt less at the time, right? It's like putting some sort of a topical anesthetic on a wound, right? You feel it less, but the wound isn't going away. Instead, it's just getting worse. So after a handful of years of that, compare that man's emotional and physical well-being to that of a man who has stayed single and not had to deal with all of that henpecking and abuse, and you'll see the difference. You see, the stress of being abused causes a cortisol response in the brain, which is the stress hormone and is bad for both your brain and your body. It just doesn't matter if you try to numb yourself to its effects or not. The chemical is still there, wreaking havoc on your health. It's like being given a drug and then trying to ignore its effects and maintain your composure. You can do it, but that doesn't mean the drug isn't still there doing its thing in the background. And if this is happening routinely, you may be able to get by in life, but over time, that drug is wreaking havoc on your health. In The Sopranos, Tony repeatedly talks about how his mother wore his strong, manly father down to a little nub over the years. Same thing happened to my father. That may be why he realized he needed to allow himself to be more emotional and express his feelings to his wife and defend himself when she's nagging him. So, as I said, Sometimes we do have to ignore feelings and not let intimidation stop us from doing something important. And there's certainly no use in dwelling on negative feelings that you aren't doing anything with. However, most feelings are worth feeling. If you are feeling something, it's probably because you need to. And that feeling should be observed and maybe analyzed. If you are going to ignore it, you should at least evaluate it properly first and make sure that's the right decision. Especially if that feeling is bad, because it could be a warning about something. Oftentimes, people avoid painful feelings that will feel really bad and be a difficult experience by telling themselves, well, there's no point in dwelling on it. When in actuality, they do need to dwell on it, at least for a little while, until they can resolve it. Dwelling only becomes superfluous when you've done it for a very long time, much past the point where you've learned your lesson and had enough time to properly deal with these things. And just telling yourself you are not going to dwell on something and then ignoring it doesn't make it go away, especially if it's important. For instance, I lost my son a couple of years ago, not in that he died, but I lost custody of him, lost my entire relationship with him. His mother poisoned him against me, hates me now, doesn't even want to talk to me. And generally speaking, on a day-to-day basis, I try to ignore my feelings of sadness about that because they're so bad that yes, even someone who's here doing a video on how important it is to feel actually has some feelings that are too much for him and he ignores them at times. But because I ignore them, they're always there in the background of my mind working. So yesterday I was listening to a song about a father-son relationship that me and my son used to listen to together while also getting super high. And I realized it was the first time I had listened to it since I lost him. The song was about half over, and it was then that I realized there were some really strong feelings sitting there in the back of my mind that I was holding back. I realized that over the last year, those feelings had gotten so big and bad that they were probably causing serious mental health problems for me. So I was like, okay, this may be super dark and scary, especially while high, and will probably make me want to fucking kill myself right here and now. But I need to open those floodgates and let this shit out. So that's what I did. I stopped ignoring them and started focusing on them. I opened myself up to them and was overcome with this great, tremendous sadness. I instantly felt like crying. It was as if I'd been holding back tears for a year and a half. And then the next thing that happened, I realized I wasn't crying. I felt like I was. I felt like I was fucking sobbing, but no tears were actually coming out, which made me realize that there was still a large part of the feelings that were in there and still being repressed, even though I thought I was now making a conscious effort to allow them and to feel them. But at that point, it had just been too long. Essentially, what I had done was emotionally constipated myself. My fucking grandfather had died recently, and there were loose ends I never got to tie up between us, and I couldn't bring myself to cry when he had died. And so, in stopping myself from crying whenever I needed to, I realized I lost the ability to cry, even in instances when I needed to the most, and it would be sociopathic not to. So now I basically have all these horrible, terrible feelings that I've got no outlet for, don't know how to deal with, and are just going to stay stuck there deep within me, poisoning me from within until I go crazy and probably fucking kill myself or something. Now, you're probably thinking, well, you have something that serious to deal with, you can just go get therapy. But that is easier said than done, and something I'm going to address in the next video. Those feelings stayed constipated like that within me for a couple of weeks until I was listening to another song by the same band and was working out. And then suddenly, I just instantly started sobbing involuntarily for a moment. Thank God I was working out at home and not the gym. But you see, that is how you cannot control emotions by suppressing them. It actually only makes them less controllable and more out of control and more apt to come out when it's not convenient. Now, another concept at play here is, just like with any other aspect of the body, if you don't exercise it, you begin losing the ability to function in that manner. So if you never cry and always stop yourself when you really need to, your tear ducts stop working at 100%, which is bad for your eyes, by the way. And just as how a man who does no physical labor and avoids, any hard work becomes physically weak and develops physical health problems, the same thing happens emotionally. A man who does no emotional labor and avoids feeling hard feelings becomes emotionally weak and develops mental health problems. That is exactly why I say that it is like retarding your brain. And I'd rather be an exceptionally intelligent but emotional person than an unemotional but retarded macho man. Wouldn't you? If you look at the long-term effects of these good old-fashioned, strong, silent, stoic types of men from the old days like my dad, you will see a pretty drastic decline in their physical and mental health over time. Men like my father, and probably yours, show us the end result of where this bad habit of denying your feelings will get you. Men who have stayed in unhealthy relationships without complaining or defending themselves for decades while their wife nags them into an early grave, these men are not better off for it. They are worse off. The stress that these men experience is causing their body to decay at a faster rate and bringing them into an early grave. And on the psychological side, what you've probably noticed with these men is that they seem brain dead for the most part until someone triggers them, and then they just blow up. They explode. For numbing themselves to their own emotions has actually not made them emotionally stronger. The lack of emotional exercise has caused them to be unable to know how to process and deal with any emotions, except by turning them into a more macho emotion that they are comfortable with, which is anger. So many of these so-called stoic, strong, silent types are actually the opposite of that. They are fragile, ticking time bombs who don't know how to respond to emotional stimuli in a healthy way. And that is not something a man should aspire to be like. And it has been proven in scientific studies about attempting to ignore or deny your feelings. Researchers Jane and Prit Ishpatel wrote about the negative effects of emotional repression in 2019 International Psychotherapy Practice and Research, stating that people who ignore their negative feelings are more likely to be stressed or depressed and get sick more often as well. So if trying to ignore, repress, or deny your feelings will not only not be successful, but will probably only make them worse and lead to other negative emotions, it kind of defeats the purpose, now doesn't it? And that isn't something a rational man would do, is it? And that even goes for crying. If men weren't supposed to cry, we wouldn't have tear ducts at all. And trying not to cry when you are grieving is like a drunk trying to hold in his piss. It isn't physiologically healthy. So allow yourself to feel, but govern your feelings so that you aren't being overly sensitive and reactive or crazy or controlled by your feelings. The key is to try to keep them appropriate and under your control, not to be controlled by your emotional mind, but to try to control it with your rational mind. But make sure you are using both sides of your brain, and when you have strong feelings, don't hold them in. You need to express them in order to not become repressed. Even if a woman or a macho man is shaming you for it, telling you you don't have a right to have feelings as a man, fuck them. As a man who has a brain, not only should you have feelings, but you should have a right to express them as well, without people shaming you for it. And if people are shaming you for having feelings that are entirely natural to have in the situations you're in, then you're probably talking with the wrong people, and you shouldn't even be around those types. That concludes this video. Thanks for listening. I hope I mansplained that good enough for you. If you liked what you heard, please click the like button. And if you feel you gained some value from this video and would like to give back, please do so with the PayPal link below, because your support helps fund me doing this work and fighting the good fight for men like you. And if you are ready to take the red pill and wake up from the matrix and the matriarchy controlling it and learn everything you need to know about female on male sexism, get your copy of my newly released book called Misandry Exposed, on sale now for a special price that won't last long. So check it out by clicking the link below. And otherwise, you can stay tuned for the next video coming out tomorrow on the male mental health crisis and the problems with therapy. And otherwise, take care of yourselves, men, because no woman out there is going to.